We have Ehosa Nehari, co-founder and CEO Multigate. Hello, Ehosa.
Hello, Nika.
Multigate is a Pan-African treasury provider operating out of 4 countries. You have the UK, Canada, Nigeria, and Uganda. A warm welcome to Ehosa. And then next to Ehosa, we have Meron. Meron Hassan is the country manager, Ethiopian Airlines, and IATA APJC chairperson in Zambia. You're welcome, Meron.
Thank you.
Yeah. Ethiopian Airlines is the largest airline group in Africa and the top 30 globally. It's also the largest cargo operators in Africa. And we have Ifayomi Carr. Ifayomi is the principal of Flourish Venture. Flourish Venture invests in fintech startups across the globe. Hi, Ifayomi.
Hello, hello.
And last but definitely not the least is Chisepo Chewa. Chisepo is the founder and COO of Boso, an e-commerce startup for building materials. You're welcome, Chisepo.
Thank you.
Okay. So we just get right to it. Well, for those of us who aren't too familiar with what the AfCFTA is, I know it's a tongue twister. I'm just going to do a quick introduction. The AfCFTA is the world's largest free trade area, bringing together the 55 countries of the African Union and 8 regional economic communities to create a single market for the continent. According to the World Bank, the AfCFTA agreement aims to provide broader and deeper economic integration across the continent, as well as attract investments, boost trade, provide better jobs, reduce poverty, and increase shared prosperity. Fintech applications across Africa are increasingly playing a larger role in e-commerce, cross-border trade, and commodities. And the rise of fintech-enabled trade applications is due to a combination of factors, including fast and scalable internet connectivity, an increasingly tech-savvy urban population, innovation and adaptive tech talent pool, and a vibrant startup ecosystem. This panel brings together a wide array of ecosystem players and stakeholders defining the future intra-African trade. So let's get right to it. So here's a general question, and I'm happy for anyone to take it, right? With the agreement of Continental Free Trade, Africa now has the world's largest free trade agreement zone with 1.4 billion population, which is a huge addressable market for any business. How do you all see AfCFTA changing the way Africa trades with itself? And what does this mean for ordinary Africans?
Yeah, so I will take that. So just answering that question, how do we see changing Africa? Certainly, I see a strong potential, but there's a difference between potential and really getting there, right? So there's one thing to have the agreement in place. There's another thing to put all the building blocks to really achieve that. When we begin to look at where Africa trades today, comparing the intra and extra values, there is immense potential. The natural resources we have, the demand across borders, but there's lots we have to do to really actualize that potential. Thanks.
Thank you.
And maybe I'll just quickly add to that. I think it's important to define what we mean by free trade, because different free trade zones have different criteria. I like to think of a framework of 3 things. So it's the movement of people, goods, and money, right? Those are the 3 main pillars that can determine whether it's what free trade actually means. And in Africa, because it's such a heterogeneous, both from all 3 of those pillars, while it's an incredible opportunity, as you mentioned, because of the pure size and level diversity, it's actually much more complex and challenging because of the differences between the different markets when it comes to those 3 pillars. And so I think it's important to define what are we actually changing in AfCFTA, and how does that affect those 3 ideas.
Does anyone want to add to that?
Thank you. I would like to add a few points on what they were saying. Definitely, Africa Continental Free Trade Area will be a key component for the growth of African countries' economic development, as well as changing the life of all Africans, as it will definitely accelerate the inter-Africa trade, as well as develop regional and local value chains. It's estimated to increase and double up inter-Africa trade, as well as to boost 32% where it will expose Africans to the international trade. And I would like to mention the challenge where we are currently facing to when it comes to the when you want to operate in Africa, when like in the current situation, to have trading within Africa, it requires the local policies and needs to be amended to align with the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, as well as the second point is the Open Sky Agreement that we are not fully implementing, hindering Africans, Pan-African airline contribution into African sky significantly reduced from 40% to 20% if we see for the past 2 decades. So we need to fully implement the Open Sky Agreement so that Africans will be able to trade among ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a follow-up question to that. Can you give specific examples in your areas of business that the AfCFTA will change the way you do business, and what bottlenecks do you foresee to be removed? Giuseppe, please.
Thank you. I think for us in the construction sector, I must mention we are really on a mission to solve Africa's 60 million housing shortage. So everybody in Africa is facing a housing shortage, and specifically in Zambia, where we started from, there's a 1.5 million housing shortage. And a lot of this material, the building material that we use to try and solve this challenge that all the African countries are facing, comes from different parts of the world and some parts of Africa. Zambia trades a lot, as an example, with South Africa. And I think for us, having a free trade area means movement of goods becomes much more fluid. Right now, there's so many bottlenecks around borders. Material sits at borders maybe for 3 days. But if there are mechanisms that allow material to move from source to destination fluidly, because all the documentation is in place, all the fees, the tariffs are known, and if possibly we can take the tariffs, customs duties to zero, that creates real advantages for African products on the African market. Being a tech business, the last thing I'll add is really movement of skills. I think Ify mentioned 3 things. It's really goods, people, and you said goods, people, and money, exactly. So money, I mean, people is a very important component for us as a tech business because of skills. I mean, my previous startup, Zipos, we hired Kenyan and Nigerian developers, and times when we needed them to move and join us here in Zambia was challenging. So if we can move this human capital across borders much easier, I think I see huge potential.
Oh, great, thank you. Does anybody want to add to that? No? Okay. Ehosa, despite the advent of the AfCFTA, Africa is still trading with some 35 plus currencies and huge current account deficits and dollar crunches by some economies. How is Multigate's treasury and cash flow solution helping companies trade both regionally and globally? And do you have any success stories you can share with us?
Thank you very much for that question, Nike. So to answer that, I think it's important to understand what is a challenge today, the unrealized potential, as I mentioned earlier. So 2022, intra-Africa exports was roughly about $92.4 billion, just intra-Africa. That's 14% of what Africa would typically export to other countries. Now, intra-Africa imports, 97.4%. $94 billion, that again 14%. Now, when you look at that 14% of what we trade externally compared to the 60% that is in the EU, you realize that there's a real gap that Africa needs to get to. So how are we doing that? I mean, first, to answer that, who is Multigate, really, right? So Multigate, we are a treasury management technology company. That's how we position ourselves. We see ourselves as partners to banks, partners to fintechs, partners to large enterprise corporates. So we specialize in working with these institutions to enable them handle their treasury needs. So, firstly, is we're the first and only SWIFT compatible provider in Africa, licensed in Nigeria and Uganda, and getting more licenses in Kenya, South Africa, Francophone, and Ghana.
Zambia, maybe?
And Zambia.
Thank
Let's
you.
not forget that. And ISO certification. So we take the credibility and regulation very seriously. Now, beyond that, we've gone ahead to build these solutions that essentially help these banks and corporates manage liquidity across positions. So when you look at treasury, the first thing in treasury is, can I see my value? Can I see my liquidity? Right, I have accounts in Nigeria, I have in Uganda, I have in Zambia, Kenya. Can I see what I have across all the positions? Now, can I seamlessly move between those currencies? Now, can I make payments seamlessly for obligations I have? So today, due to the defragmentation, multi-currency, as you mentioned, that is still a challenge, but we're still doing it. It could be worse. It could be 5% of that, but we're at 14%. So what are we doing at Multigate? So we work with institutions, provide them our platform. Good example would be a corporate. Just to answer your question around Stockstead Stories. We had 2 occasions. So one was a mining company that had a trade between Nigeria, Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania. They had liquidity ready, okay? So they had Kenyan shillings. They really wanted to make a trade into Uganda for some minerals they were going to sell. But then getting the line of credit was a problem. This is a massive company. They didn't want to lose that deal. So they approached us. We got our compliance team, KYC, everything was kosher. We opened accounts through our partners, paid the money in. We provided them UGX to be able to make that payment. So they made that deal. Now imagine if we were not there. They would have lost that and kept on losing more opportunities. So for us at Multigate, that's what we sort of position ourselves. Working with the fintechs, working with banks, working with large corporates to really mitigate that risk and the issues around sort of cross-border within Africa and outside Africa as well.
Yeah, well done. I'm sure that must have been a lot, but that's good. The next question is for you, Maron. One basic tenet of the AfCFTA is free movement of goods and people. This requires huge infrastructural investments. To this effect, Ethiopian Airlines is leading intra-Africa trade with its globally acclaimed cargo services and passenger flights. Can you tell us the extent and services of ET's cargo and passenger flights across the continent? And how's ET's cargo services facilitating e-commerce across Africa?
Thank you. Ethiopian Airlines operates the largest network in Africa. We operate more than 60 destinations for passenger, as well as 30 dedicated freighter service on cargo, in addition to our daily belly capacity. Let me mention a scenario where we all have faced during the pandemic. We, as Ethiopian Airlines, were ready to operate and transport the much needed supply for vaccines and medication across the continent as well as beyond. Thank you.
Thank you. Ifayomi, you have invested in several African startups in the past. How is the advent of AfCFTA impacting your pipeline build-up and portfolio selection in the years to come? How are your investee companies accelerating intra-Africa trade?
Yeah, so I would caveat this by saying our investment strategy is determined by what are the innovations or developments that we've seen that will affect the effectiveness of business. So an example is, as I think of intra-Africa trade, I mentioned the 3 pillars that I use to approach. So when we evaluate what is our investment thesis, we'll say, all right, what has happened that will either allow companies to make more money or to spend less money? So increase revenue or reduce costs. So an example of an innovation that has nothing to do with AfCFTA would be stablecoins, which we were just discussing backstage. Stablecoins have allowed companies and individuals to transfer money cross-border in a way that saved them much more time and money than the alternative. This has only happened in the last 3 to 5 years. I think the the transaction volume of stablecoins now is more than that of most of the major credit cards, MasterCard, American Express, about $7 to $8 trillion a year. So this innovation has allowed for certain businesses to both make more money because they can transfer more effectively and save more money. So that innovation has affected our investment strategy. As I think of AfCFTA and intra-Africa trade more broadly, there are opportunities to affect our investment thesis. I think, Chispo, your company is a great example. As we think about the movement of goods, so certain businesses rely on cheap transfer of goods in order to leverage that for an individual market. Right now, that's very challenging for intra-Africa trade. And in Kenya, for example, we still import many of our goods, basic services and goods from Asia, Europe, and the US because of the challenges of trade within Africa. So if certain policies were implemented, which made that easier to access goods from Southern Africa, West Africa, to a place like Kenya, that would affect our investment strategy because it would significantly reduce the costs of basic goods and products, which would make certain companies that were uninvestable or unviable viable. So for me, it's really around what policy decisions, how will that affect the ability for companies to make more money and reduce costs, particularly when it comes to that movement of goods and people.
Agreed. Chisapo, you are in the construction industry. How are you able to navigate and the logistics of moving building materials across countries and also manage transactions and payments with your suppliers?
So at the moment, we've had to, what would I call it, hack the system, so to speak. Because obviously there are a lot of bottlenecks, but we have to make things work. So for instance, one of the simple things I'll talk about is if you know you're moving material from South Africa into Zambia, you know it's going to take you about 3 to 7 days. So you always have to have upfront, and you always have to plan upfront and put that into consideration. Movement of money takes maybe 48 to 72 hours. So you always have to keep that put that into consideration because nobody's going to release material until they see finances in their bank account. So these are some of the hacks that we have. But we know that all these are small, micro things that people don't pay attention to, but we know that they inevitably affect deliverables in terms of projects and so on. If these things were more fluid, then projects would get done much quicker. So, yeah.
And I'm sure you would even get more business because you're able to do more. Okay. Ehosa, what is your view of the possibility of Africa having a single trading currency in the decades to come? And if this is not a near future possibility, how can businesses in Africa navigate trading across multi-currency and mitigate related currency risks?
Thank you for that question, Nike. A very diplomatic question, of course, but a political one rather. But to answer that, do I believe we will at some point have a single currency? At some point, I believe so. Now, when will that happen? That would be something I would say from when every government and country in Africa decides to do it, just count minimum 10 years from that, right? Just because there are the multiple layers of alignment that are required. You have cultural differences, monetary policy differences, debt exposure, so all that are taken into account. But be that as it may, currently at the moment, we have 35 plus currencies. How should the business really trade, as we were discussing earlier on, navigating this? So the first is working with a regulated partner, of course, so banks, the right fintechs who have the right licenses, because that is very important. Now the second is, can that FI, financial institution, either they're a banking financial institution, BFI or NBFI, non-banking, can they provide you with access to the currency in which you are looking to make that payment into, looking to trade into? So for us, the way we look at it is the ability to navigate. You need sort of easy and seamless access to other currencies. So if you're, for example, Kwacha, you're looking to trade with South Africa Rand, can you, at any time you need it, can you get Kwacha to Rand currency seamlessly? 2 is facilitating the trade. Now, he talks about, how one should navigate and how one should mitigate the currency risks. The way we look at that is, one, having that access, but two, planning sort of forecasting. So forecasting payables. You know that, okay, in a month, in 2 months, I have to pathway with X amount into South Africa. I need to make a payment of 10 million rand, but I'm holding kwacha today. Right now, currency is great. I don't know what it will be then. Now, can I lock in an exchange rate at that point for when I need to make that payment? Can I go into a forward contract with this related partner that I'm having my liquidity with to be able to hold our currency? So those are ways that corporates can really use to mitigate the currency risk, and we've seen that happening quite a lot. I remember some years ago, 3 fintechs approached us. They saw there was movement between Nigeria and Uganda. And so they said, hey, can we please give you UGX and you pay Naira to us to settle our merchants in Nigeria? And so we partnered with various banks. And the fintechs, they could predict this is what the collection is going to look like, plus or minus 10%. So based on this, can we agree on the rates at that point? So that way they can also display that rate to their own clients. So we see, just sort of rounding that up, first, do I see Africa having a single currency? Yes. When that will happen, I have no idea. We'll leave that to God and African countries, right? Secondly, how do we mitigate the risk? We're working with the right partners. Most importantly, having that forward sort of forecasting and having those forward contracts to enable you to mitigate those currency exposures. Thanks.
Thank you. I was looking forward to getting a timeline from you, and then I'll quote you on that. Myron, you have API connected several payment methods from mobile money to e-wallet to local cards as payment options, which is not the case for other international airlines operating in Africa. How did this payment flexibility accelerate movement of people and goods across Africa?
Thank you. As African carrier, I'm proud to say that we have managed to arrange local payment method whereby throughout all the 60 destinations that we are operating, we provide an arrangement and accessibility for our passengers to use the local payment, whereby, let's say, for Zambian market, we have collaborated with Zamtel to provide to avail for passengers to book using mobile or websites at the palm of their convenience. So that's not the case for all international airlines operating in Africa.
Well, I do have a personal experience. I tried to upgrade my flights at the airport and they were asking me for cash. So yes, very happy for all of the things that you guys are doing. Well done.
Thank you.
This is a question to everyone. I think I'll just take it from maybe Chisepo and then we go all the way to the last. What is your expectations of intra-Africa trade and commerce in the next, say, 5 to 10 years? Chisepo.
So I think for me, with conversations of this sort, the first expectation is I think we need to stop talking and start doing. If we can move away from rhetoric and just get straight to action, that would be great. We've seen a few countries actioning some of these things. Namibia and Zambia, you don't need a passport anymore, just your national ID, and great. So some of these things are already happening, and I think we don't need to stop. You need to step on it. A few other things I would say, top of my head, is I think logistical infrastructure. We're talking of payments and people and so on, but I think even the logistical infrastructure, this is an opportunity for us to move away from what I refer to as colonial patterns of distribution and consumption. If you look at the topography of Africa right now, most raw materials are connected straight to the nearest port. They're not connected to other African cities that need this material. So the closest port for Zambia's copper is straight to Beira or straight to Durban because it's going out. So can we create logistical infrastructure that moves that material to the nearest refinery, maybe in Nairobi or in DRC, something of that sort?
Yeah, thank you. Ifayemi?
Yeah, I think I unfortunately have a somewhat somber short-term outlook. I think if we reflect on the macro circumstances of many of the major African markets, coupled with the global macro market, there will be a sharp decrease in demand for certain goods, which will hurt local production. The biggest driver of that probably being China as a sort of global phenomenon, and they're lowering demand for African products and goods. And then I think locally there will be many of the major economies have significant macro risk in the next 12 to 18 months when it comes to repayment of debt, currency fluctuations, et cetera, which will probably decrease the amount of local investment. So that's a short-term perspective. But I have a more optimistic medium-term perspective, largely driven by some of the innovations that we've all discussed so far. So the movement of payments is much easier today in Africa than it was 3 to 5 years ago. There's been a lot of innovations in the financial sector that have allowed people to make payments, to transfer money, and to do commerce cross-border, which is only going to accelerate for the next few years. The movement of people has also increased. There's been an interesting move. I live in Kenya, where they've announced they'll allow all Africans to come visa-free by the end of the year. Already we're seeing the migration of talent across the continent increase in a way that it hasn't for any of our lives. That will continue to increase. As a result of both of those, I think the level of business will continue to increase in the medium term. But in the short term, there will be a lot of stumbles, largely outside of our control. But I'm overall optimistic.
Thank you. Meron?
With our passenger service globally and in Africa, as well as our regional expansion, and also we are working aggressively on establishing a huge e-commerce facility at our headquarters with 50,000 square kilometers that will enable us to uplift 150,000 tons per annum. And in addition to our current facility, which we have managed to uplift 750 tons per annum for dry, perishable, and other goods. So this will definitely contribute for the e-commerce and the realization of African Continental Free Trade Area. And as Ethiopian Airlines, we are fully committed to contribute. And for this sake, we took an initiative and avail 10% discount for all inter-Africa shipment starting August by hoping to boost and strengthen foundation for Africa Continental Free Trade Area's realization. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nike, for that question. So definitely I see it on the uprise, right? United Nations, the Commission for Africa, the Economic Commission for Africa predicts that within the next 22 years, 2045, potentially the values I mentioned earlier should increase by 35%. Now, that is not enough. However, what we are seeing is if you create a pipe between two water buckets, water will flow, right? Now, as we begin to open these borders, we saw South Africa the other day, visa-free for Ghana and Kenya now. South Africa is number one when it comes to inter-Africa trade across. Of course, after that goes Nigeria and DRC. As you mentioned earlier about, immigration, people being able to travel freely. As we begin to see those opening up, we definitely will see an increase. Now, a lot of fintechs are building fantastic products, both on the retail side, on the corporate side, on the treasury management side. As we begin to see the proliferation of that in the market and pumping that into the industry, transactions will move. The other day, we received a call, Uganda, a lot of sugar needs to move into Kenya. They want cash on carry, right? They pay me now, take it. I don't want to wait 30, 60 days. And with that, opportunities came in. I saw a company, fintech in Kenya, took that opportunity, finance that trade using their platform. That went through. So we're beginning to see this again. Necessity is really building invention. So as you mentioned, do I see what's the future like? Definitely, I see that growing. I certainly see it's going to grow faster than the 35% that UNECA predicts, just because certain governments are now doing the right thing and speeding things up. Thank you.
Thank you. At this juncture, I think we can take a question or two. I can be generous and make it two, but let's try it with one first. Do we have any questions from anyone in the audience for any of our panelists? Any questions? Okay, I take that as a no. Thank you very much, Isabel. Thank you so much, Ifayomi. Thank you, Meron, and thank you, Elsa.
Thank you
for gracing the stage with me. And thanks to everyone for listening. This was an insightful session. And yes, we've come to the end of the session. Thank you.